Welcome. My name's Jeff Bartels. I'm an infrastructure technical specialist at Autodesk, and I'm joined by my colleagues, Jerry Bartels, we're related, and Dana Judge is here as well. This is the inaugural event for our 30-minute workout sessions. If you've ever seen Jerry and I present live, you know that we are all about physical fitness. I only wish that was true. The purpose for these 30-minute workouts is to help you add additional tools to your AutoCAD or your Autodesk toolbox. We've all been teaching Autodesk applications. We've all attended Autodesk training before, and many times when you attend a class or take a training session, there's never enough time during the class to learn everything there is to know about a particular tool. Basically, you cover the functionality that's necessary for you to do your job. And then a lot of those other nuance features are the type of things that you pick up over a lifetime in your engineering career. You may learn some things from colleagues. You may learn things by attending AU. You may visit YouTube channels or follow blogs to get information. The purpose for us putting together this session or this bi-weekly sessions is to provide another resource for you to pick up tools that aren't typically talked about on a regular basis, but can be very beneficial for your work. So, a couple of ground rules. The examples that we're going to be looking at today in many cases are going to be abstract in nature. We do that for a reason. That way we can focus on a tool, just the specific tool itself. This way, once you understand how the tool works, you can apply it in whatever situation you want back at your office. We will also, our plan is for all of these sessions, we're going to start on time and we're going to end on time because we value your time. These sessions are 30 minutes long. They're meant to be hopefully easy enough that you can get in, get out, and get on with your day. That said, we are going to be recording the sessions, so in the event you do arrive a little bit late or have to leave early, the sessions are going to be recorded and we'll be sharing them with you after the session's over. So, quick agenda. Today we're going to be talking about ways to select objects. If you think about it, many of the commands that we use in AutoCAD and Civil 3D and Map 3D, they ask us to select objects. So the more ways you know how to select objects, the more efficient you can be with virtually every command. We're going to talk about several ways to do this. We're going to look at using key-ins. We're going to look at different methodologies used by the Autodesk platform. We're going to look at how we can select objects based on what they are or their properties. We'll look at how we can save selections for future use. We're also going to touch on some system variables that control selections. And then at the end there, I've got bonus content. In the event, we cover everything that we're intend to talk about here in this half-hour time frame, and there's some time left. There's always things that we can talk about. So I've got a bonus area there. In the event we don't get to bonus content, that's something that we can push forward to another session in a couple of weeks. So with that, this is going to be a PowerPoint free zone. We are going to be working live in the application for the entire duration of our time together today. If you have questions, Jerry and Dana are standing by. If you can put those in the questions pane or the chat area, they can help with any questions that you have during the session. In the event there are questions that we cannot answer during the session, we will definitely get back to you with answers. With that, we are going to disperse with the PowerPoint. Let me drop out of this. And in the interest of full disclosure, I'm using Civil 3D 2020 at the moment. That said, the majority of what we're going to look at today is going to work going back several releases. A lot of this functionality is not new, but I'm hoping that we have an opportunity to show you some things today that maybe you haven't seen before. So these could, in fact, be new features for some of you. So when it comes to selecting objects, I'm going to launch an action command here like move. And I'm sure you're aware when we're asked to select objects, we can single pick items. I can also pick on screen and pull to the right and create a window. I can pull to the left and create a crossing selection. This is the way things have been since the beginning of time. That said, I don't always have to pull to the right to get a window. I can actually, sometimes it may be beneficial to pull to the left and get a window. I can force the type of selection I want by using a key-in. Let's pan this over and we'll take a look. I've got some circles here. I would like to select these with a window selection, but I've got a bunch of geometry stuff that's in my way. Might be easier to select these by coming at it from the other direction. If I launch an action command, I'm going to use move in this case, at the select objects prompt, if I type W and press enter, that will force a window selection. So when I click on screen, you can see regardless of the way I pull, it's going to create a window. I can very easily come over here and select, press enter, and then I can move these around. Now, I'm not going to show it, but we can also do C. If I type the letter C, I can force a crossing selection if I want to, W or C. Sometimes the objects that you select aren't going to fall into a nice rectangular pattern. You may wish to create selections that are based on a polygonal shape. We can do that too using a key-in. For example, I'd like to select these blue objects. I'm going to launch an action command here, move, select objects. I'll type WP. This stands for window polygon. Now, as I pick points on screen, you can see that I'm creating a window type selection, but I have full control over the shape of the boundary. And in this case, just 3 clicks. If I hit enter, I can complete that. And I have selected all of those shapes. So WP, window polygon. Let's slide over. In addition to a window polygon, I can also create a crossing polygon. Maybe I'd like to select these blue rectangular shapes. I'm going to use rotate this time. So after selecting my action command to select objects, I'll type CP for crossing polygon. This allows me to create a crossing selection that conforms to whatever boundary I want. I can take and pick as many points as I want on screen to define that. So you can see just picking a couple points there, I can very easily, with a crossing polygon, select these shapes. Let's slide this over a little bit. Sometimes when you make a selection, you may select too much. I've launched the move command here, and I'll make a selection across the top. Now, I've selected a couple circles here that I didn't intend to. If I want to remove these, at the select objects prompt, if I type R stands for remove. When I hit enter, you can see it says remove objects now. Anything I select at this point will be removed from the selection set, and it will remain in remove objects mode until such time as I tap the letter A for add. Add will allow me to go back to a traditional select objects prompt, and anything I select will be added to the previous selection. So I have the key-ins add and remove. Let's try and use those together. If I wanted to select all of these blue shapes, I'm going to launch an action command here. We'll say move. To select these, I could create a window to get all of them. I could type R for remove and select these. I can then type A for add, and I could select these. So in just a couple picks, I can grab those shapes using add and remove. Let me press escape. Sometimes you may wish to make a selection of objects that are in kind of a linear pattern. Once again, I'm going to select these blue shapes. I can do this using a feature called fence. I'm going to launch the move command, and at the select object prompt, I will type F for fence and hit enter. If I pick a point on screen, you can see that as I draw, I'm kind of creating a crossing selection, but it is linear, so I can kind of snake through these objects. I'll press enter, and enter again to finish my selection. Maybe we'll pick them up from the center of this circle, and I'll place them to the center of this one. So using the fence option, I can select objects that are arranged in a linear pattern. Now maybe I'd like to move these objects again. That might be a little bit difficult to select them now because now they're interspersed with other objects. Let's look at another key in. I'm going to launch the move command, and this time I'm going to type P for previous. When I hit enter, it will reselect the previous selection set. So very easy to get those because it was the last thing that I selected. I will pick these up from the center of this circle, and I'll put them, and I missed. That's perfect. That's all right. We'll come back to that another time. So I can take and move those, or I can reselect them using P for previous. Let's slide this over. Let's try another thing. I'm going to create a rectangle. So I just created an object on screen. I'm going to launch the erase command, or an action command here. At the select objects prompt, if I type L stands for last. If I press enter, you can see it erases, or it selects the last item that I created. Okay, so if I hit enter, I can complete that command and delete it. Here I have some clip art. I just recently did a presentation on social media, so I've got some clip art that I brought into the application here. If I, kind of hover over this object, you can see this is a mess. Some of these things are hatch. I've got individual line segments, duplications, things don't meet end to end. Basically, I'd like to join all this stuff together into a single polyline. I am going to use the boundary command here for a second. Let me pick right in the middle of that, and I'll press enter. That just traces that entire object as a polyline. Now, I still have all the trash behind it. So knowing what we know now, I could say erase. I could window all of this. R for remove. What do I want to remove? L for last. I want to remove the last object that I created from that selection. And when I hit enter, it deletes everything in the background and leaves me with just my nice clean polyline. So last we can use as a key in. We can make freeform selections. For example, I'd like to select these green trees. I'm going to use the move command as an example. If I hold the left mouse button down and drag, I can create a freeform selection around these. Okay, when I get back to the beginning, when I release, you can see that they're now selected. I can take and move these around. Let's take that one more step. I'm going to use the move command again. If you click and hold, as you're dragging, we're not required to use a window selection. If I tap the space bar, each time I tap space, it will cycle through the various modes. So I can cycle to a crossing selection, window, or fence, whatever I need, depending on just tapping the space bar. So that is a freeform selection. Using the space bar, we can control the mode. Let's pan this over. Maybe I'd like to select this circle, and I'd like to select all of these linear items. I'm going to launch an action command here. At the Select Objects prompt, I will type 'FS. This is a transparent command. FS stands for Fast Select. Using Fast Select, if I select an object, it will select that object and every object that that object touches. Let me hit Escape. We'll take this a little bit further. There is a system variable that goes along with Fast Select. I'm going to type FS Mode, and you can see that the Fast Chain Selection's turned off. I'm going to turn this on. I'll just type on and press Enter, and we'll run it again. Let me launch Move, and at the Select Objects prompt, I will type 'FS for Fast Select. Now, with the chaining turned on, if I select an object, it will grab that one. It will select every object that object touches, and then every object those objects touch, and so on and so on. If you're wondering, the FS mode system variable is stored in the registry, so it will persist between drawings and between times that you launch an AutoCAD platform, whether it be Civil 3D or AutoCAD or Map. Now let's talk about another system variable. If I select some objects here, you can see that each time I select an object, the new object is added to the previous selection. This is the way the AutoCAD platform has worked forever. There is a system variable that controls this. The system variable is called PicAdd. If I type PicAdd and hit Enter, I can see by default that's set to 2, so it's turned on. I'm going to set that to 0, and when I hit Enter, just take and watch down in the corner here for a second. Let me set that to 0. I'll hit Enter and turn it off, and you can see that I get this little flashing warning. We'll talk about that in a second. When PicAdd is turned off, if I select objects, you can see that each time I make a new selection, it deselects the previously selected objects. Let me press Escape. Why would you want this? Well, if you've been using AutoCAD for a long time, you probably wouldn't. But if you're someone who's new to the application and you're coming from another drawing tool where you are familiar with holding the Shift key in order to add to a selection, a lot of the Adobe products are this way. If your PicAdd is turned off, if I select an object, I can now use my Shift key, which I'm holding down. If I hold down Shift, I can now use this to add to a selection. Likewise, if I'm still holding down Shift, if I select previously selected objects, Shift will also remove from the selection. Let me hit Escape. So if you're someone that's new to the application coming from another tool and you're used to using Shift, that's how you can make it work for you here in the AutoCAD platform. So I show you that so I can show you this. PicAdd is one of those system variables that's easy to accidentally turn on and off. If I open the Properties palette, there's a toggle for PicAdd right here. In fact, sometimes people use this as a prank. They play on their neighbors, go over to somebody else's machine and turn their PicAdd off and see how long it takes them to figure out how to get their selections to work properly. In fact, PicAdd is so easy to accidentally change. That's why there's this warning came up in the corner. This is the system variable monitor. If I click that and bring it up, you can see that there's some system variables here that the AutoCAD platform is looking at on a regular basis to make sure that they don't change. This is another tool we can talk about on another day, but for right now, I'm going to click Reset to put that back to its original setting. Let's click OK. So that is PicAdd. Now, let's talk for a second about methodologies. Since the beginning of time, the AutoCAD platform has been based on a verb-noun methodology, meaning you pick your action item first, move, that's my verb, and then move what? That's my noun. I want to move these objects. Okay, so since the beginning of time, we've been selecting the action first and then selecting our objects. About AutoCAD 2000, which seems odd, that's 20 years ago now, they gave us the ability to go in the other direction. If you're the type of person that likes to select your objects first, you can do that, noun, verb. So I can select my objects and I can click move or any other action item after the fact. So if you're someone that likes to work in that sense, we've just talked about some key-ins like window polygon, crossing polygon, fence. How can you work noun verb and use the key-ins? Because the key-ins occur at the select objects prompt, and unless you launched an action command, you don't get select objects. Let me open up the properties palette. That's what this button's for. If I click select objects here, technically the command is p-select, but this will allow you to select objects even without a command running. So if I do p-select at the select objects prompt now, I can type F for fence, and I can reselect my triangles and hit enter, and enter again. And now that they've been selected, I can move them, I can erase them, I can go over to the properties and change their properties if I want to. So if you're someone who's a noun verb person and you want to use those key-ins, that's how you can do it. Up to this point, we've been looking at how we can select objects based on proximity or where they are on screen. Now let's look at some ways we can select objects based on what they are or what their properties are. Here, I have a drawing that represents a typical detail. It has some standard items in here. I've got some multi-leaders and geometry and dimensions. I've got this multi-leader. Maybe I'd like to select all of the multi-leaders. If I select an object and right-click, in the menu you'll find an option called Select Similar. You can very quickly select all objects similar to your selection set, and you can see that grabs those multi-leaders. I could do it with a dimension. Right-click, select Similar, grabs the dimensions. The linear items that make up this geometry, I think these are all lines. If I select one of these, I can right-click, select Similar. Okay? I show you that, so I can show you this. What if I select a line segment and I change the color property on this to blue? If I select this line and right-click and choose Select Similar, is it also going to grab the blue one? Yes, it will. Why? Because that's the default settings. We actually have control. We can go through and dial up exactly how similar these objects have to be when using the Select Similar command. Let's look at that. Select Similar is actually its own command. If I type this in, I don't have to type the whole command in, but as I type this, it'll auto-complete. I can see Select Similar there. If I launch this as a command, there's a settings option down at the command line. Let me bring this up. This shows me the properties that this is how I can dial this up exactly how similar I want these to be. And I'm going to say, you know what, by default, it's just looking at name, which would be like a block name, and layer. So by default, it was grabbing all lines that were on the same layer. Here I can say I want you to look at color as well. So now that I've turned that on, let me click OK, and Select Objects is Select Similar is running. So I'll select this. Now if I hit Enter, I can see that it grabbed all lines of a particular color that are on that layer. If you're wondering, the settings for your Select Similar command are stored in the registry, so those will persist between drawings, or each time you launch the application, it's going to remember those previous settings. Let's open another drawing. Here, I've got a bunch of content. I've got some blocks, I've got some civil objects, I got an alignment, some Kogo points, I got a parcel here. I've basically got a playground of content here that we can select. Using the Civil 3D platform, we can select civil objects using the Prospector tab. If I go into this, I can find civil objects. This is where you can identify all the civil objects that are in your file. Under alignments, for example, here, I'm going to right-click on Main Street and choose Select, so I can select it from here, even if I don't know where it is in the drawing, even if it happens to be on a layer that's turned off or it's assigned a style that's set to no display. Very easy, I can make the selections. Let's go under Sites here. There's that parcel. I can right-click and select that. Works for all of your civil content. You can do it for points. We can take and zoom to various objects if we want to. So we can make selections through the Prospector tab. I can also make selections. Let's say, I've got some text notes here. Let's look at this. Maybe I'd like to adjust the property of these text notes. This is kind of an aggressive method, but I could select everything here on screen. If I go over to the Properties palette it'll show me at the top that it found 29 items. If I expand this, it will sort them for me based on type. I can select them from here if I want to. As an example, I'll choose text. Here I can see the properties that apply to all of those text objects. As an example, maybe we'll change their rotation. I'll set these to 45. When I hit enter, you can see that happen on screen. Now, everything's still selected. Maybe I'd like to make a change to the Kogo points. So there's 8 Kogo points there. Label rotation. Currently the property's not set. I'm going to change this to 45, and when I hit enter, you'll see that occur on screen. Now, if you're like me, when you make an adjustment like this, you may wonder, well, okay, now that I set that to a number, how do I set that back to property not set? If we want to do that, I can type a period. Period essentially means nothing. So I'll hit enter and I can put that back to the original setting. Okay, so I can make selections using like a sorting method, just by grabbing it all and letting the properties palette sort it out for me. I can also select objects based on their properties. For instance, maybe I'd like to select all text objects that have a rotation angle of 45 degrees. If I go to the Properties palette, there's an icon here called Quick Select. We can also launch this command by typing QSelect at the command line. Very powerful tool. We work this from the top down. So I'm saying, looking at the entire drawing, object type, I'm interested in text. This happens to be a list of everything that's in this drawing. I'll say text, and I'm looking for text with a rotation equals, you can see some of the other options here, equals 45. Include a new selection set. Now they're selected. Once they're selected, I could change their properties. I could do the whole noun-verb thing. I could take and use an action item here and move these if I want to, or rotate them or mirror them. So now that I've made that adjustment, they're no longer selected. What if I want to reselect them? Knowing what we know now, I can come back over here and I can say select objects, P for previous, and I'll hit enter. Now they're reselected. Maybe I'd like to make a selection and refine it. If I go to the Properties palette, I can bring up QSelect and I can apply QSelect to the current selection. So objects are selected, but I would like to remove any objects from this selection that are forced to have a color. So I can say, based on my current selection, I'm looking for text whose color is not equal to by layer. I want to exclude those from the current selection. And when I click OK, you can see how these two were removed because they're forced to be red. Let's press Escape. One more thing, this tool will also work with civil objects. For instance, let's say I wanted to find all Kogo points in a particular area that are elevation 0. I'm going to bring up my QSelect tool. I want to set this back to include, and I'll click the select box. And I'll use the selection method we saw a minute ago. I'll do a nice freeform select there. Object type, Kogo points. I'm looking for Kogo points whose elevation equals 0. And if I click OK, I can now see those have been highlighted. I can adjust them. I can put them as part of a group. I can raise them to the elevation of a surface. So we can very quickly select objects based on what they are, what their properties are. One more thing, let's talk about how we can save a selection. We kind of talked about previous a little bit ago. I can grab a previous selection using the letter P, but what if I want to save a selection so I can grab it again later today or even tomorrow? To save a selection, we're going to use a command called group. On screen, I've got a polyline here, and I've got a station offset label applied to that. Just for a second, I'm going to grab this polyline, and you can see that when I move that, these objects aren't tied together. I'd kind of like them to stay together. So let me undo to put that back. I'm going to create a saved selection out of these two objects. So I'm going to type group, select objects. I will select this polyline and this label. And before I hit enter, if we look down here at the command line, you can see that if you want to, you can be formal. You can give the group a name. You could even give it a description if you want to. I'm going to give it a name. I'll call it sample. And I'll press enter. Now, if I come over and click on this, you can see that both of these items are selected because they're both part of a group. And I have a grip here I can use as I move this around. You can see that some people, the first time they see group, they think, well, that's awful close to a block. Not really. This is just a saved selection. So as I move this around, you can see how that label will update with it. But the two of them will be selected together, and I can pick them up from the same object snaps I've had before. Once you make a group, you may wonder, well, okay, now that I've made the group, maybe I'd like to grip edit some of these things. How do I do that now that they're both kind of shown in this rectangle? There is a system variable called pick style. Pick style controls the selection of your groups. It's set to 1, which means it's on currently. I'm going to set this to 0 and press enter. If pick style is set to 0, you can still have groups, but they're not selectable. So that means I can now pick these objects and I can do with them what I want. I can take and change this call out here a little bit if I want to. And then if I want to turn pick style back on again, I'm not going to type it. If I right click, I can go to recent input, choose pick style, and I can turn that back on again. We'll set that to 1. And now that's a group again. Groups can even be selected as a key in. If I launch the move command, for example, at the select objects prompt, I can type G for group, and then I can type the name, sample, and I can make the selection that way. So the groups can even participate as a key in. Finally, once you've made a group, if the time comes where you don't need the group anymore, how can I get rid of it? The command we'll use for that is ungroup. Ungroup. If you select, or if you type ungroup or launch the ungroup command and select a group, the group is now dissolved. These objects, they go back to the way they have been. They're no longer related to each other. If you're interested in group, you don't have to type all these things. There are buttons for them, and there's ways to put the buttons in the Civil 3D ribbon, but let me show you here. The group feature is native AutoCAD functionality. So if I load my drafting and annotation ribbon here on the Home tab, we'll find the group feature down here. So if you're interested in groups, there's additional things you can do with that. I'd recommend just doing a little bit of exploration in there. See if there's other ways you could take advantage of that saved selection functionality. So let me flip back to Civil 3D. And I'm going to jump back to my PowerPoints here, because we are coming up at the top of the hour. So we've looked at a lot of things here in a short amount of time. We've touched on how we can make selections using key-ins. We've looked at window polygon, polygon, crossing polygon. We looked at fast select, add, remove, previous, last. We touched on different methodologies. If you're someone who likes to select your objects first as opposed to second, we looked at different ways that you can do that. We touched on how you can select objects using the QSelect command to select them by property or by object type. We looked at how we could sort them using the properties palette. We looked at how we could use the group functionality to save selections if we want to reselect objects quickly in the future. And we touched on some additional system variables that control selections. One thing they always tell you to never do is go back into the application once you go back to your PowerPoint slides. But I've got another almost 2 minutes left here. I want to show you one more thing. Let me right click. I'm going to go to options. Since we're talking about selections, under options, if you go to the selection tab, there are controls here that control how your selections work, how they're previewed, whether a command's active, when no command's active. Visual effects settings, the window selections are blue. Crossing selections are green. You can choose colors. You can determine whether you want to see that hatch or not. You can control selection previews for various objects. So if your CAD manager doesn't mind making you making adjustments there, if that's possible for you, or if you want to discuss making some adjustments to those type of things, that would be where you would do it. Since we're talking about selections, we might as well show it all. So, okay, with that, I am going to ask Jerry and Dana if there's any questions that have come up that they've not been able to answer, or anything that we can maybe table for a future session.
Nothing.
Fantastic.
Great presentation, though.
All right, thank you. Hopefully we want to leave them wanting more. We're looking at doing things like this every 2 weeks, kind of a rapid fire approach, get through as many things as possible, and just show you some of the lesser known tools or things that aren't talked about on a regular basis that we hope you can put to work today if you want to.
I was going to say, an invite will come out for the next session, probably early next week.
Fantastic. So with that, we've reached the top of the hour. The session has been recorded, so if you keep an eye on your email, we'll send you a hyperlink that you can use to view the recording.